Have you ever felt something so charged with mystery that you almost whispered to yourself, "This must be God"? Maybe it was a sudden dream that carried a message so vivid it felt like a divine letter sent straight to your heart. Or maybe it was a stranger who spoke words they couldn't possibly have known, and for a second, you felt the ground beneath your feet shake with something beyond the natural. Those moments can feel like anchors in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. But here's a hard truth many never pause to consider. Not every manifestation of power, light, or wonder is what it appears to be. Some things wear the costume of heaven, yet carry the weight of something far different. I remember someone telling me once about an experience that had changed their life, or so they thought. They had attended a gathering where everyone was swept up in what looked like a divine visitation. People cried, some trembled, others laughed uncontrollably, and in the center of it all there was this figure, this leader, claiming it was the very breath of God moving among them. It felt real. It looked real. For a time, it even bore fruit. A sudden surge of passion, generosity, and boldness. But slowly, beneath the glow, threads began to unravel. Control replaced freedom. Fear replaced joy. And the same spirit that promised life began to drain them dry. This is the chilling reality. What shines brightest isn't always born of light. Our hearts are vulnerable, especially when we are desperate for meaning, for a sign that we're seen, for proof that heaven has not forgotten us. When you've been wandering through silence, the first whisper that sounds like an answer feels sacred. And that's where the danger hides. Deception doesn't always come as darkness creeping in. Often it comes as warmth, as hope, as beauty at just the moment you're too weary to question it. There's a reason why so many are led astray not by what repels them, but by what comforts them. Think of how easily our senses can be tricked. A light in the distance can look like dawn, until you get closer and realize it was only a fire burning what you hoped to save. A voice can echo with reassurance, only to guide you into decisions that fracture your peace. And the hardest part is that, at first, these manifestations rarely ask you to abandon everything you know. They simply ask for your attention, your curiosity, your heart to lean in just a little more. By the time the roots are in, you hardly recognize the soil you're standing on. This isn't about living in fear of every spiritual moment. It's about learning to recognize that not all that glitters is holy. True encounters with the divine carry a different weight. They don't demand your surrender through pressure, but invite it through peace. They don't inflate your ego, they soften it. They don't leave you tangled in someone else's control, but release you into something deeper, freer, truer. The false, on the other hand, often leaves a residue. Confusion, dependence, a sense that you can't walk without whatever or whoever gave you that experience. It feeds on your need rather than healing it. If you've ever walked away from a moment that was supposed to be holy but left you feeling used, or restless, or strangely empty, there's nothing wrong with you for questioning it. In fact, that questioning may have been the quietest form of discernment stirring inside you. Sometimes the most spiritual response is not to run toward the most dazzling sign, but to stop and listen for the steady, quiet voice that does not compete for your attention but waits for your trust. And here's what many forget: truth does not rush. It does not manipulate. It does not seduce you with spectacle and then starve you of substance. The manifestations that truly come from above often grow slowly, humbly, in the soil of patience. They leave you changed not for a night, but for a lifetime. They may not always thrill the crowd, but they transform the soul. And that's the difference. One leaves you chasing the next emotional high. The other plants something eternal in you that no crowd can manufacture. So when something extraordinary happens, when a message feels too perfectly timed, when an atmosphere feels heavy with power, when someone claims to be a messenger, pause, look deeper. Ask yourself, does this lead me toward humility or pride? Toward dependence on a person or dependence on the truth? Does it make me freer or does it subtly bind me? These are the questions that save us from being carried away by what only pretends to be sacred. There's something unsettling about realizing how easily our hearts can be swayed when they are longing for comfort. Have you noticed that the moments we are most vulnerable are often the moments we are most at risk of mistaking something false for something holy? It happens quietly, almost invisibly. You are in pain, searching for meaning, crying out for a sign, and suddenly something appears. A vivid dream, a moment of electric energy in the room, words spoken that seem to pierce straight through you. And your heart whispers, "Finally, this must be God." But what if it isn't? What if the very thing that seems to bring light is simply a reflection? Bright enough to blind, not bright enough to heal. I remember sitting with someone who told me about a moment that haunted them. They had followed a charismatic figure who performed what seemed like miracles. Instant healings, uncanny revelations, waves of emotion sweeping over crowds. For months, they surrendered their time, their money, their trust, believing it was all divine. Only later, when they felt spiritually empty and emotionally bound, did they start to question what they had experienced. They weren't bitter, they were heartbroken, because to believe something is from God, only to find out it wasn't, feels like betrayal at the deepest level. It shakes your ability to trust your own heart. It makes you question your discernment, your faith, even your sanity. And that's exactly why these manifestations are so dangerous. They don't just mislead you in the moment. They plant doubt in your soul that can last for years. They mimic love, but leave you dependent. They echo truth, but twist it just enough that you don't notice the drift until you're far from where you started. They promise freedom, but their end is often control. Subtle at first, then stronger as you surrender more of yourself in the hope of keeping the feeling alive. So how do you recognize them? There is no single formula, and anyone who tells you there is might already be selling you the very illusion you need to escape. But one thing is certain, truth can withstand your questions. If something demands blind acceptance, if it discourages testing, pausing, or weighing its fruit, be cautious. What is real will never crumble under honest reflection. What is false thrives only when unexamined. Another thing I've noticed is that false manifestations often magnify the moment and diminish the journey. They make you believe that what you felt in that hour, that evening, that gathering, is the entire point. That the goosebumps, the tears, the ecstasy are themselves the proof of holiness. But the real divine presence is not obsessed with moments. It is concerned with transformation. It does not end with the spark. It plants a fire that keeps burning when the music stops, when the room is empty, when the crowd disperses. And maybe that's the question worth asking. What remains when the moment ends? Are you freer? Are you at peace? Are you more compassionate, more whole, more anchored in truth than you were before? Or do you feel the need to chase that high again, to go back, to depend on the one who gave it to you? Because anything that leaves you empty unless you keep coming back to feed it, whether a person, a movement, or a manifestation, might not be feeding your spirit at all. It might be feeding off it. It takes courage to admit that something which once felt sacred may have been a counterfeit. It's easier to deny it, to defend it, to protect the memory of what once felt so real. But liberation often starts with the painful work of honesty. Maybe I wanted it to be God so badly that I ignored the cracks. And in that moment of humility, not shame but humility, you open the door for the real to step in, often quieter, often slower, but infinitely more enduring. There is a subtle danger in thinking deception always comes wrapped in malice. Often it doesn't. Sometimes it walks through the door wearing a smile, carrying words that soothe your wounds, offering the very thing you've been begging heaven to give. And that is why even good intentions, pure, heartfelt, desperate intentions, can open the door to something that looks divine but is not. It's not that people are foolish, it's that they are human. They want to be led. They want to feel safe. They want an answer that feels immediate when life has felt like a question for too long. I once spoke with a woman who had been praying for direction for years. One night, she dreamed of a radiant figure who spoke with a voice that sent shivers through her whole body. The message was clear, urgent, full of promises of protection and prosperity if she just followed a specific path. It felt like a miracle. How could she not believe it? But as time passed, that path led her to isolation, to a dependence on the words of that vision instead of the quiet, steady truth she once knew. It began with hope, it ended with chains, and she said something I will never forget. I wasn't chasing power, I was chasing comfort. I just wanted to feel like heaven had not forgotten me. This is how it happens so often, not through rebellion but through longing. We open our hands wide and something steps in, claiming to be the answer we were waiting for. And it doesn't always ask for much at first, just a little more trust, a little less questioning, a little more time spent in its shadow. Until, slowly, your discernment dulls, your hunger is hijacked, and your life becomes centered on preserving that feeling rather than pursuing what is truly holy. You might be wondering, how can something feel so right and still be wrong? Because deception does not need to feel false to be dangerous. It only needs to imitate the outer form of truth. It borrows the language of the sacred, the gestures of the divine, the emotions of the soul, and it wraps itself around your deepest need. It gives you what you craved so that you stop seeking what you truly needed. Real manifestations of the divine rarely demand your loyalty to a person or a system. They point you toward transformation, not dependence. They lead you into deeper humility, not inflated certainty. They often come without fanfare, without spectacle, without the insistence that you must choose them or lose everything. And that, perhaps, is the hardest part for many to accept. The real often feels slower, quieter, less thrilling than the counterfeit. It does not always match the script we imagined. If you have ever walked through a season where you doubted your ability to know what is real, take heart. The very act of questioning, the very ache you feel to know the difference, that is a sign of awakening. It means your soul is not asleep. It means you are learning to pause before you surrender, to wait before you worship, to listen longer than the moment demands. There is strength in that hesitation, even if others call it doubt. And perhaps that is the key we so often miss. Truth is not fragile. It does not crumble because you asked it to prove itself. What is false, however, often grows restless when you hold it up to the light. It demands urgency, insists on immediate devotion, because it cannot survive in the long, slow gaze of discernment. So when a manifestation comes, whether a dream, a presence, a miracle, or a movement, let it linger. Let it breathe. See what fruit grows in its shadow. If it is real, time will only make it clearer. If it is false, time will reveal the cracks that were always there. There is a pain that very few people talk about openly. The pain of realizing you gave your heart, your trust, and your reverence to something you believed was sacred, only to discover later that it was not what it claimed to be. This kind of wound cuts deeper than disappointment. It feels like a betrayal of the soul. You didn't just lose time or money, you lost a piece of your innocence. You questioned your own ability to hear, to discern, to believe. And in many ways, that's the cruelest part of these false manifestations. They don't just mislead you, they leave you hesitant to trust again, even when the real finally comes. Healing from that kind of experience is not quick, and it is not easy. There are days when you replay the moments in your mind, asking yourself how you missed the signs. There are nights when you lie awake, wondering if you were foolish, weak, or somehow to blame. You longed for something real. And hope, even when misused, is not a flaw. It's evidence of your heart's desire for what is true. In the quiet after the storm, when the music fades and the crowds disperse, many find themselves standing in that emptiness asking, "Where do I go from here?" This is the turning point that matters most. Some run back to the familiar, even if it hurt them, because at least it was certain. Others turn their hearts cold, deciding never to trust again, and in doing so, they close the door not only to the false but to the true as well. But there is a third way, a harder, braver path. It is the choice to stay open while becoming wise, to let the wound teach you without letting it define you. One of the first steps on that path is to stop punishing yourself for being human. The longing that made you vulnerable is the same longing that will, in time, guide you to what is real. There is nothing shameful about wanting to encounter the divine. The problem is not the desire, it is the disguise that preyed upon it. So speak gently to yourself. You are not broken for having believed. You are growing because you learned. Another step is to revisit the roots. What made the false manifestation feel real to you? Was it the rush of emotion, the charisma of a leader, the promise of instant answers, the pressure of a crowd? Name it, not to condemn yourself, but to understand the doorway through which deception walked. That doorway often holds the key to your healing. When you can name how it happened, you are far less likely to walk that road again. And finally, healing requires time. The real does not rush, and neither does recovery. There will be days when your heart aches for the simplicity of the moment you believed. There may even be a strange grief for the excitement you felt, even if it was built on a lie. Allow yourself to feel that without shame. It is the soul's way of clearing the space where something truer can one day grow. Sometimes the most sacred encounters come after the counterfeit has been exposed. They come quietly, without demanding anything of you, without dazzling your senses. They come as a steady presence. A whisper that is patient with your doubts, a light that does not blind you but slowly warms you back to life. And in that, you begin to see the difference, not because someone shouted it at you, but because now your soul recognizes the contrast. There comes a moment, after the chaos of disappointment has settled, when your heart starts asking a quieter but far more powerful question. How do I know the difference next time? This is where true discernment begins, not in fear, not in suspicion of everything that moves, but in a kind of deep, anchored awareness that is not easily swayed by flashes of light or waves of emotion. Discernment is not about becoming cynical, it is about becoming steady. It is not about rejecting every spiritual moment, it is about learning to see the essence behind the appearance. True discernment often starts in stillness. The world teaches you to chase the dramatic. The thunderclap, the crowd's roar, the sudden miracle, but the sacred often whispers. It speaks in ways that allow you to walk away and think, to breathe, to question. Anything that rushes you, that demands instant loyalty, that tells you there is no time to weigh its fruit, this is where the alarm should sound. Because what comes from the real does not panic at your hesitation, it welcomes your patience. Another way to cultivate discernment is to pay attention not just to what you feel in the moment, but to what grows after it. Emotions are real, but they are not always reliable indicators of truth. There are encounters that can make you weep, tremble, laugh, even collapse to the ground, and still leave you more dependent, more fearful, more bound than before. And there are moments so gentle you almost miss them, but months later you realize they planted a kind of freedom that has quietly transformed your life. Discernment looks beyond the spark to see what kind of fire it becomes. It also helps to ask, who benefits from this manifestation? Is it lifting one person or one group into a place of control? Is it creating a culture where your dependence is on them, or where your connection to the divine becomes more personal, more resilient, more free? Counterfeit manifestations often centralize power. Real ones tend to release it. Perhaps one of the most underrated aspects of discernment is community. Not the kind that pressures you to conform, but the kind that allows honest questions. If you cannot share your doubts, if you feel afraid to voice your discomfort, if your hesitation is treated as rebellion rather than wisdom, then something is already off. Truth is never threatened by sincere questions. Falsehood, however, often crumbles in their presence. And maybe the greatest practice of all is time. Time is the enemy of deception because deception feeds on urgency. It tells you this is your only chance, your one shot, your now or never moment. But what is real remains real tomorrow and next week and a year from now. It does not need to be clutched in fear of losing it. It waits for you to recognize it. So how do you know the difference next time? You slow down. You stay honest with your heart. You let the moment breathe, no matter how powerful it feels. You invite light into the shadows, even if others call it doubt. You remember that the sacred is not fragile. It can hold your questions, your pauses, your hesitations, and still remain what it is. And in that slow, deliberate way, you become the kind of person who is not tossed by every wind of wonder. You become rooted, not hardened but wise. You still long for the divine, but you no longer let your longing blind you. You welcome the miraculous, but you do not worship the spectacle. You learn to walk with open hands and clear eyes. There is a certain stillness that comes after all the noise has faded. When you've seen both the spectacle and the silent, when you've tasted what promised to be divine and found it empty. That stillness is not weakness, it is the beginning of wisdom, because now you know what you didn't before. Not everything that glitters is sacred, and not every surge of emotion is a sign that heaven has touched the earth. And that knowledge, painful as it may be, is a kind of freedom. In that quiet place, you start to see how many times you were drawn to the extraordinary because you were aching for the ordinary to matter. You wanted something to interrupt the monotony, to assure you that your prayers were heard, your life was seen, your struggles weren't just echoes in the void. That longing is deeply human. It is the same longing that poets have written about for centuries, that saints have carried in their bones, that seekers of every kind have wrestled with. And it is not wrong. But what you've begun to understand is that longing, when unguarded, can make you easy to lead, by anyone who knows how to speak the language of your hunger. So where do you go from here? You walk forward, slower this time, but not colder. You choose to become someone who seeks the presence of the divine not in the thunderous display, but in the fruit it leaves behind. You watch how it shapes your life, your choices, your peace. You become less impressed by who shouts the loudest and more drawn to what quietly endures. You stop asking, how bright is this light? And start asking, what does it illuminate? What does it grow in me? And maybe, just maybe, you begin to see that the real manifestations, the ones that are truly of God, rarely compete for your attention. They come without needing to prove themselves. They make you more free, not less. They point you beyond the moment, beyond the messenger, beyond the experience itself, and lead you into a life that is steady even when the miracles fade. That is their beauty. They don't ask you to keep chasing them. They teach you to walk. If you have been deceived before, that does not mean you are broken. It means you are being sharpened. It means you now carry a kind of wisdom that cannot be bought, only lived. And it means that when the next shimmering thing comes along, whether it glows in a dream, or in a room full of raised hands, or in the words of someone who claims to speak for heaven, you will pause. You will breathe. You will remember. The real does not fear your hesitation. The false does. And in that pause, in that breath, in that hard-earned stillness, you may find that what you were seeking all along was never in the noise. It was waiting for you here, in the quiet, where truth does not shout but stays.